2 years after my husband's funeral, a notary called. "Madam, I've discovered a second will. Nobody knows about it. Come urgently. Alone." When I read it, I couldn't believe my eyes. Good day, dear listeners. It's Louisa again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret, and for 43 years I believed I knew everything about my husband, Robert. We built our life together in a modest 2-story house in Cleveland, raised 2 children, and watched our grandchildren grow. Robert was a quiet, methodical man who worked as an accountant and always kept our finances in perfect order. When he died of a sudden heart attack 2 years ago, I thought I had laid him to rest along with all our shared secrets. The funeral had been attended by nearly 100 people. Our daughter Linda came with her husband Mark and their twin boys. Our son David flew in from California with his wife Jennifer. Everyone wore black, everyone cried, everyone told me how sorry they were. Robert had always been well-liked in our community, a pillar of our church, a man who paid his taxes on time and never caused trouble. After the burial, we gathered at our house. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, read Robert's will in our living room. It was straightforward. The house went to me. His savings were split between our children, and his life insurance would cover my remaining years comfortably. Linda and David seemed satisfied. They hugged me, promised to visit more often, and within a week, they were gone. Life returned to its quiet routine. I spent those 2 years learning to be alone. I tended Robert's rose garden because he would have wanted that. I attended church every Sunday and played bridge with the ladies on Tuesday afternoons. The house felt too big, too silent, but I managed. I always managed. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning in October, my phone rang. "Mrs. Whitmore?" The voice was familiar, but strained. "This is Harold Peterson. I need to speak with you urgently." My heart tightened. Harold had been Robert's lawyer for over 20 years. Why would he call me now, 2 years after everything had been settled? "Is something wrong?" I asked, gripping the phone. "I've discovered something," he said carefully. "A second will, Robert's second will. I found it in an old safe deposit box that was recently flagged by the bank. Mrs. Whitmore, nobody else knows about this yet." The room seemed to tilt. "A second will? How is that possible?" "I need you to come to my office, alone, today, if possible. This is delicate." Something in his tone made my skin prickle. "Harold, what's in it?" He hesitated. "I think it's better if you read it yourself. Can you come at 2 o'clock? I agreed, my hands trembling as I hung up. What could Robert have hidden from me? From everyone? We shared everything, didn't we? The drive to Peterson's office felt endless. My mind raced through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Had Robert been in debt? Had he owned property I didn't know about? Had there been another woman? Peterson's secretary showed me into his office immediately. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. The envelope sat on his desk, yellowed with age, Robert's handwriting unmistakable on the seal. "Margaret," he said, using my first name for the first time in all the years I'd known him. "Before you read this, I want you to know that I had no idea this existed. Robert must have placed it in that box shortly before he died, and he never told me about it." He slid the envelope across the desk. My fingers felt numb as I picked it up, broke the seal, and unfolded the pages inside. The first line made my breath catch. "To my beloved wife, Margaret, if you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth I couldn't bear to tell you while I was alive." I kept reading. With each sentence, the room grew colder. Robert's words revealed a reality I never imagined. a betrayal that reached back decades. He wrote about money hidden in accounts I didn't know existed. He wrote about promises made to people I thought I could trust. He wrote about lies that had been fed to me, carefully, systematically, for years. But worst of all, he wrote about who had orchestrated it all. When I finished reading, I looked up at Peterson. He was watching me with concern. "This can't be real," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew it was. Every detail aligned with moments I had dismissed, conversations that had seemed odd, glances I had ignored. "What do you want to do?" Peterson asked quietly. I stared at the will in my hands. The people Robert named, the ones who had smiled at his funeral, who had hugged me and promised to care for me, they had been playing me for fools all along. What did I want to do? I wanted the truth, and I wanted justice. I drove home in a daze, Robert's second will burning like a brand in my purse. The afternoon sun seemed too bright, too cheerful for what I had just learned. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for 10 minutes, unable to move, unable to think clearly. Inside the house, I locked the door behind me and went straight to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water with shaking hands and sat at the table where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals. How many of those meals had been built on lies? I spread the will out in front of me and read it again, slowly this time, forcing myself to absorb every detail. Robert had kept a separate bank account for 15 years. Not a small account, over $200,000 accumulated through careful deposits and investments. Money that should have been part of our shared life, part of our retirement planning. But it wasn't for retirement. According to the will, this money was meant to correct the wrongs done in my name and to protect Margaret from those who would harm her. Who would harm me? My own children? The will was explicit. After Robert's death, our daughter Linda and her husband Mark had been receiving monthly payments from Robert's estate. Payments I knew nothing about. $2,500 a month, supposedly for business investments Robert had promised to support. But there was no business. Linda had told me she and Mark were struggling with their mortgage, that times were tight. I had even given them money from my own savings to help with the twins' school tuition. They had been lying to me, taking money twice over while I scrimped and saved. But Linda wasn't the worst of it. David's name appeared on nearly every page. My son, my firstborn, had apparently been the architect of a plan to ensure Robert's estate would be divided in his favor. Robert wrote about confrontations they'd had, about David threatening to contest the will unless certain conditions were met. David had been pressuring Robert to disinherit me, to put everything in a trust that David would control for my own good, because I was too old to manage finances. I felt sick. I remembered conversations now, casual suggestions David had made during his visits. "Mom, have you thought about simplifying your accounts? Maybe you should let me help you with the bills. It's too much stress at your age." I had dismissed it as concern. It had been calculation. The final revelation was about Robert's sister, Carol. Sweet Carol, who called me every week, who brought me casseroles and sat with me during the lonely evenings after Robert died. According to the will, Carol had been the one who convinced David to pressure Robert. She had her own debts, her own needs, and she saw me as an obstacle to an inheritance she believed she deserved. I sat at that kitchen table until the sun set and the room grew dark. The betrayal wasn't just about money, it was about trust, about family, about every assumption I had built my life upon. I could do nothing. I could pretend I never found the second will, let Peterson file it away, continue my quiet life with my bridge games and my rose garden. They would never know I had discovered their scheme, or I could fight. I thought about Robert's final words in the will. "Margaret, you are stronger than you know." Don't let them take what is rightfully yours. Don't let them make you small. He was right. I had spent 2 years grieving, 2 years being the helpless widow they expected me to be. But I wasn't helpless. I was 72 years old, and I had survived a Depression-era childhood, raised 2 children, and managed a household through 43 years of marriage. I was not weak. I picked up my phone and called Harold Peterson. "I want to contest the original distribution," I said when he answered. "I want to freeze any ongoing payments, and I want to know exactly where every dollar has gone." "Margaret," he said carefully, "if you do this, they'll know something is wrong. This will get ugly." "Let it get ugly," I replied. "They started this. I'm going to finish it." After I hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time, planning. I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. I needed proof, documentation, evidence they couldn't deny. I needed to be smart, methodical, just like Robert had taught me. I pulled out a notebook and began to write. Names, dates, amounts, questions I needed answered. By midnight, I had the skeleton of a plan. Tomorrow, I would begin. Tomorrow, I would stop being the victim they thought I was. Tomorrow, I would become someone they never expected. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my Navy suit, the one I had worn to parent-teacher conferences and bank meetings years ago. I wanted to look composed, serious, like someone who meant business. At 9 o'clock, I arrived at Peterson's office with my notebook and a resolve that surprised even me. "I need complete documentation," I told him. "Every payment made from Robert's estate since his death. Every transfer, every check, every wire. I want to see the paper trail." Peterson nodded slowly. "That will take a few days to compile. The executors, Linda and David, will have to be notified if I request certain records." "Then request them," I said firmly. "Tell them it's a routine audit for tax purposes. Don't mention the second will yet." He agreed, though I could see the worry in his eyes. He thought I was stirring up a hornet's nest. He was right, but I was beyond caring. While Peterson worked on the financial records, I began my own investigation. I started with the bank where Robert had kept his secret account. The manager, a young woman named Sarah, was initially hesitant to share information, but when I showed her the death certificate and Robert's second will naming me as the sole beneficiary of that account, she relented. "The account has been dormant since your husband's passing," she explained, pulling up records on her computer. "But there were regular deposits made for 15 years, always on the first of the month, always from an account registered to—" She paused, reading the screen. "Whitmore Consulting, LLC. "What's that?" I asked, though I already felt the answer forming like ice in my stomach. "It appears to be a business entity registered in Delaware. The principal owner is listed as David Whitmore. My son's company." My son had been funneling money to Robert, or perhaps Robert had been funneling money to David through a complicated shell game. Either way, David had been involved in Robert's secret finances far more deeply than I'd imagined. I spent the afternoon at the county records office, searching through business registrations and property deeds. What I found made my hands shake. Whitmore Consulting, LLC, had received consulting fees from 3 of Robert's clients I remembered him mentioning, clients whose books he'd managed for years. Fees that had never appeared in our joint tax returns. Had Robert been embezzling? Or had David been using Robert's credentials to siphon money from clients? The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was potentially criminal. By the time I returned home, it was dark. I found Linda's car parked in my driveway. She was sitting on my porch steps, her arms wrapped around herself against the autumn chill. When she saw me, she stood quickly. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight. Mr. Peterson called David today. He said something about a financial audit. What's going on? So they already knew something was happening. I kept my expression neutral as I unlocked the door. Come inside, Linda. It's cold. She followed me into the kitchen. I didn't offer her tea or coffee. I simply sat down at the table and waited. Why is Peterson asking questions? She demanded. The estate was settled 2 years ago. Everything was divided according to Dad's will. Why are you stirring things up now? Is there a reason I shouldn't? I asked calmly. Her face flushed. It's difficult, Mom. David and I have moved on. We've made plans based on what we received. If there's some kind of investigation, it could complicate things. Complicate things, I repeated. Tell me, Linda, what kind of complications are you worried about? She hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw guilt flicker across her face. She knew. Maybe not everything, but she knew enough. Are you still receiving payments from your father's estate? I asked directly. What? No, of course not. Everything was finalized. Don't lie to me. My voice was harder than I'd ever used with my children. I know about the monthly payments. $2,500 for a business that doesn't exist. Linda's mouth opened and closed. The color drained from her face. Who told you that? She whispered. Your father did, I said. He left me another will, Linda. A second will that explains everything. She sank into a chair, her legs seemingly unable to hold her. Oh, God. Oh, God, David said we destroyed that. He said Dad never filed it. He said... She stopped, realizing what she'd just admitted. David knew about the second will? I asked, my heart pounding. Linda looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about greed or money. This was about conspiracy. This was about my children actively working to deceive me. The point of no return had arrived. There was no going back now. I didn't sleep that night. Linda had left my house in tears, refusing to say anything more except, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't explain why my children had betrayed me. Sorry didn't give me back 2 years of grief mixed with their deception. By morning, I had made my decision. I called Peterson at 8 o'clock. File the second will, I told him. Immediately. And I want to contest the original distribution based on fraud and undue influence. Margaret, are you certain? This will... I'm certain, I interrupted. My daughter admitted last night that David knew about the second will. They actively tried to destroy it. That's fraud, Harold. Criminal fraud. There was a long silence. Then, I'll draft the papers today. But you need to understand what's about to happen. Your children will fight this. They'll hire lawyers. This could tear your family apart. My family was torn apart the moment they decided to lie to me, I said coldly. The papers were filed by noon. By 2 o'clock, my phone was ringing constantly. I ignored every call. By 4 o'clock, David was pounding on my front door. Mom, open this door. We need to talk. I let him pound. I sat in my living room, listening to my son rage on my porch, and felt nothing but resolve. Eventually, he stopped. Eventually, his car screeched out of my driveway. The next day, their lawyer contacted me. Richard Crane, a slick attorney from downtown Cleveland who specialized in estate disputes. He called from an unknown number, catching me off guard. Mrs. Whitmore, I represent your children, Linda and David. They're very concerned about these recent legal actions. They want to resolve this matter amicably, without involving the courts. How amicable were they when they were stealing from me? I asked. Stealing is a strong word, Crane said smoothly. There were certain payments made in accordance with your late husband's verbal wishes. Wishes that may not have been properly documented, but wishes nonetheless. Verbal wishes, I repeated. Do you have any proof of these verbal wishes? We have testimony. Witnesses who heard Robert discuss his intentions. Let me guess, I said. Carol Whitmore, my sister-in-law? His silence confirmed it. Tell my children that if they want to talk, they can call me themselves. Not through a lawyer, not through intermediaries. Themselves. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, they came together. Linda, David, and Carol. The three of them arrived at my door just after sunset. I watched through the window as they conferred on the porch, clearly strategizing. Finally, Linda knocked gently. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. We need to settle this, Mom, David said. His jaw was tight, his eyes hard. This wasn't my son asking. This was a businessman negotiating. You're being unreasonable. Dad wanted us to have that money. He told you to commit fraud? I interrupted. He told you to hide assets and lie to your mother? It wasn't like that, Linda said, her voice pleading. We were just doing what he asked. He wanted to make sure we were taken care of. And what about me? I asked. Didn't he want to make sure I was taken care of? Carol stepped forward. She was wearing her sympathetic face, the one she'd worn at Robert's funeral, the one she'd worn every time she'd brought me those casseroles. Margaret, dear, you have to understand. Robert was worried about you. He thought you might not be able to handle everything alone. He wanted David and Linda to have control so they could help you. Get off my property, I said quietly. They stared at me. All of you, get off my property, now. Mom, please, Linda started. You want to threaten me? Fine, take me to court. Bring your lawyers, bring your fake witnesses, bring whatever you think will work. But Robert left me that second will for a reason. He knew what you were doing. He knew, and he tried to protect me from you. You're making a mistake, David said, his voice low and dangerous. You can't win this. We have resources. We have lawyers. We have time. You're an old woman living alone. This stress will kill you. Was that a threat or a warning? I couldn't tell, and I didn't care. Try me, I said, and closed the door in their faces. I stood in my dark hallway, listening to them argue on the porch, listening to their anger and frustration. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from power. They had underestimated me. They all had. For the next 3 days, I rested. I needed to. The confrontation had drained me more than I wanted to admit, but I also needed them to think I was weak, to think their threats had worked. Let them believe I was afraid. Let them believe I was reconsidering, because I was about to strike back harder than they could imagine. On the 4th day after the confrontation, Carol showed up alone. I watched from my bedroom window as she got out of her car, carrying what looked like a bakery box. She walked slowly up my path, her face arranged in an expression of concern. This was the aunt who had read me bedtime stories when I was sick, who had helped me plan my wedding, who had held my hand at Robert's funeral. The doorbell rang. I waited a full minute before answering. Margaret, sweetheart, Carol said, her voice dripping with honey. I brought your favorite, cherry pie from Schmidt's Bakery. I thought maybe we could talk, just the two of us. No lawyers, no arguments, just family. I looked at her for a long moment, then stepped aside to let her in. She bustled into my kitchen, setting down the pie and pulling out plates without being asked, as comfortable in my home as she'd always been. That comfort now felt like a violation. I want you to know, Carol began, cutting generous slices of pie, that I had no idea things would get this ugly. David and Linda, they're scared, Margaret. They've made decisions based on what they thought was your husband's true wishes, and now they're afraid of losing everything. They should have thought of that before they lied to me, I said, sitting across from her but not touching the pie. It wasn't lying, Carol insisted. It was protection. Robert was worried about you after he was gone. He wanted to make sure you wouldn't be taken advantage of by strangers, so he arranged for David to oversee things. It was love, Margaret, not deception. If it was love, why did Robert write a second will warning me about all of you? Carol's smile faltered for just a second. That will, Margaret, honey, Robert wasn't well at the end. He was confused, scared. He wasn't thinking clearly. He seemed perfectly clear to me. Think about what you're doing, Carol said, leaning forward. You're 72 years old. Do you really want to spend your remaining years fighting your own children in court? Spending thousands of dollars on lawyers when you could be enjoying your grandchildren? There it was. The threat wrapped in concern. The suggestion that I was too old, too frail, too close to death to bother fighting. My grandchildren, I repeated softly. David's boys, who I haven't seen in 6 months because he's too busy with his consulting business? Linda's twins, who suddenly can't visit because I'm creating too much family drama? Carol's expression hardened slightly. If you drop this case, they'll bring the children back. We can be a family again. But if you persist, if I persist what? They'll cut me off completely? I smiled without warmth. Carol, they've already cut me off. I just didn't realize it until now. You're being stubborn. I'm being strong. There's a difference. Carol stared at me, and I saw her recalculate. The sweet aunt persona dropped slightly, revealing something colder underneath. Robert left you the house and a comfortable income, she said. That's more than many widows get. Why isn't that enough? Why do you need to destroy your children's futures over some money you don't even need? Because it's not about the money, I said quietly. It's about the truth. It's about the fact that my husband felt he had to hide a will to protect me from my own family. That's not a family worth preserving, Carol. She stood abruptly. You're making a terrible mistake. The lawyers will drag this out for years. You'll spend your last days in courtrooms and depositions. Is that really what you want? What I want, I said, standing as well, is justice. What I want is accountability. What I want is for all of you to face what you've done. Carol picked up her purse. The bakery box stayed on my counter, untouched. I tried to help you, she said coldly. I tried to make this easy, but you're determined to be difficult. Please leave, I said. She walked to the door, then turned back. David has friends, Margaret. People who owe him favors. People who can make things very difficult for you if you continue down this path. Think about that. Was she threatening me? Actually threatening me? Get out of my house, I said, my voice like ice. After she left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at that cherry pie. Then I picked up the box and threw the entire thing in the garbage. That evening, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Father Thomas from our church, a man who had known our family for 20 years. I needed to talk to someone, needed to know I wasn't crazy for doing this. Margaret, he said warmly when he answered. I've been thinking about you. How are you holding up? Oh, I told him everything. The second will, the discoveries, the confrontations, the threats. I half expected him to tell me, to reconcile with my children, to turn the other cheek, to choose peace over justice. Instead, he said, Margaret, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is hold people accountable for their actions. That's not vindictiveness. That's integrity. Those words settled something in me. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being true to myself, to Robert's final wishes, and to a standard of honesty my children had abandoned. The next day, I received a call from an old friend, Ruth Feldman, whom I'd known since my children were small. She'd heard through the church grapevine about my troubles. I'm coming over, she announced. And I'm bringing wine. You don't have to face this alone, Margaret. She arrived an hour later with not just wine, but also her daughter, an attorney who specialized in estate law. Pro bono, Ruth's daughter said firmly when I protested. Anyone who would do this to their own mother deserves everything coming to them. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger or determination. I felt supported. I felt seen. I wasn't alone in this fight. And that changed everything. 2 weeks later, Linda and David came back. This time they brought their spouses and the grandchildren. I watched from my living room window as the cars pulled up, as my twin grandsons tumbled out of Linda's minivan, as David's boys walked solemnly beside their father. This was a calculated move, I realized. Bring the children. Make me feel guilty. Make me remember what I stood to lose. I opened the door before they could knock. "Mom," Linda said, her voice breaking, "please, the boys miss you so much. We miss you. Can we come in? Can we talk like a family?" The twins, Jeremy and Josh, 8 years old, looked at me with confused eyes. They didn't understand why Grandma hadn't been to their soccer games, why Thanksgiving was suddenly canceled, why Mom cried at night. How could I say no? I let them in. The adults settled in my living room while the children, sensing tension, quietly went to the playroom where I still kept toys from their last visit. The silence among the adults was heavy, awkward. "We've been thinking," David began, his tone careful, measured. "Maybe we all overreacted. Maybe there's a way to resolve this that works for everyone. We just want peace, Mom," Linda added. "We want our family back." Mark, Linda's husband, leaned forward. "We're willing to make concessions. We could return some of the money, not all of it. We've already invested it, but some. Enough to show good faith." "And in return?" I asked. "In return, you drop the lawsuit," David said. "You acknowledge that Dad's first will was his true intention, and we move forward. Fresh start." "Fresh start," I repeated, "after 2 years of lies." "Mom, we made mistakes," Linda said, tears forming in her eyes. Real tears or performed ones? I couldn't tell anymore. "We were wrong not to tell you everything, but we were trying to honor Dad's wishes. He told us both, that he wanted us to take care of you, that he wanted us to have control because he was worried." "Don't," I interrupted sharply. "Don't you dare use your father's concern for me as justification for stealing from me." "It wasn't stealing," David's voice rose. "It was." "What was it, David? Enlighten me. What do you call taking money you weren't entitled to while lying to your mother about your financial situation?" Jennifer, David's wife, spoke for the first time. She'd always been the quiet one, the peacemaker. "Mrs. Whitmore, I know you're hurt. You have every right to be. But think about what this is doing to the children. They don't understand why their grandmother suddenly doesn't want to see them. They think you don't love them anymore." The words hit like a physical blow. I looked toward the playroom where I could hear the soft sounds of the boys playing. "That's not fair," I said quietly. "Using the children as leverage." "We're not using them," Linda protested. "We're thinking about them. They need their grandmother, and you need them, Mom. You're alone here. Don't you want to be part of their lives?" Of course I did. God, of course I did. I wanted to go to Jeremy's piano recitals and Josh's baseball games. I wanted to help David's boys with their science projects. I wanted to be Grandma again, the woman who baked cookies and told stories and gave too many presents at Christmas. But at what cost? "If I drop the lawsuit," I said slowly, "what happens to the truth? What happens to accountability? Do you all just go on pretending that what you did was acceptable? That lying to me, stealing from me, conspiring against me was just a mistake that we'll never speak of again?" We'll do better, Linda promised. We'll be better. Just give us a chance. I looked at each of them. Linda with her pleading eyes, David with his barely concealed impatience, their spouses watching me with expressions of hope and calculation. They wanted me to fold. They wanted the grandmother who always forgave, who always understood, who always put family peace above her own dignity. No, I said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. What? David said. No. I won't drop the lawsuit. I won't pretend this didn't happen. I won't sacrifice the truth for your comfort. Mom? Linda started. You bring my grandchildren here and use them as emotional blackmail, I continued, my voice gaining strength. You pretend to offer compromise while actually offering me nothing but more lies. You want me to accept crumbs of my own money and call it generosity. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I'm too old to see what you're doing? David stood, his face reddening. We tried to do this the easy way. The easy way, I repeated. You mean the way where I give up and you face no consequences? You're going to regret this, he said, his voice low and threatening. We will fight this with everything we have. Every lawyer, every legal maneuver, every delay tactic. We will make this so expensive, so time-consuming, so exhausting that you'll wish you'd taken our offer. Get out, I said. Mom! Linda tried again. Take your children and leave my house. All of you. Now. They gathered their children, the boys confused and scared now, sensing the rage in their parents, and left. David slammed my door so hard a picture fell off the wall and shattered on the floor. I stood in my empty living room, surrounded by broken glass, and felt something unexpected. Exhilaration. They had tried their best manipulation, brought their greatest weapons, and I had stood firm. Yes, I was afraid. Yes, my hands were shaking. Yes, part of me wanted to run after them and take back my words, but I didn't. Because for the first time in my life, I understood something Robert had never taught me. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes protecting yourself matters more than keeping the peace. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. I picked up the phone and called my new attorney, Ruth's daughter. They just tried to get me to drop everything, I told her. I refused. What's our next move? She laughed, actually laughed. Now? Now we go on offense. The deposition took place on a cold morning in February, exactly 3 months after I'd filed the contest. We sat in a conference room at the courthouse, fluorescent lights humming overhead. My attorney, Sarah Feldman, sat beside me. Across the table were David, Linda, and their lawyer, Richard Crane. Carol was scheduled to testify later. A court reporter typed silently in the corner, recording every word. This was it. The moment of truth. Sarah had prepared me well. We had documentation. Bank records showing the secret payments, emails between David and Linda discussing how to manage Mom's expectations, text messages between Carol and David about the second will. We had Robert's own words, preserved in that second testament. We had the truth. But they had something too. Confidence. The arrogance of people who had never been held accountable. Let's begin, the mediator said. Mr. Whitmore, please state for the record your relationship to the deceased. Robert Whitmore was my father, David said calmly, and Margaret Whitmore is my mother. And you served as co-executor of your father's estate along with your sister? That's correct. Sarah leaned forward. Mr. Whitmore, were you aware of a second will written by your father approximately 1 month before his death? David didn't even blink. No, I was not. You're under oath, Sarah reminded him. I understand that. I was not aware of any second will. Sarah slid a document across the table. This is a text message from your phone to your sister, dated 3 days after your father's funeral. Can you read it aloud? David picked up the paper. His jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. It says, "We need to make sure the second will never surfaces. Peterson doesn't know about it. As long as we stay quiet, we're fine." And yet you just testified you weren't aware of a second will. I misspoke, David said smoothly. I was aware Dad had discussed writing another will, but I didn't think he'd actually done it. I thought it was just talk. Just talk, Sarah repeated. So when you texted your sister about making sure this will never surfaces, you were referring to a will you thought didn't exist? I was being cautious. Or you were covering up evidence of fraud. Crane interjected, "Objection. Counsel is arguing rather than questioning." "I'll rephrase," Sarah said. "Mr. Whitmore, did you or did you not actively conceal the existence of your father's second will from the probate court?" "I didn't conceal anything. I had no obligation to report a document I didn't possess." "But you knew your father had written it?" "I knew he'd talked about it." "And you made no effort to locate it?" David's expression hardened. "My father was dead. He was buried. The will on file was clear. I had no reason to go searching for alternative documents." It was a good answer, rehearsed. But Sarah was better. "Mr. Whitmore, let's talk about Whitmore Consulting LLC. That's your company, correct?" "Yes. And this company received payments from several of your father's accounting clients, correct?" "My father referred some clients to me for additional consulting services. That's not unusual in business." "These payments totaled over $400,000 over 15 years. Were these services documented? Did you have contracts with these clients?" For the first time, David hesitated. "The relationships were informal, based on trust." "Based on trust," Sarah echoed. "Or based on your father allowing you to bill his clients for services you never provided?" "That's a lie," David said, his composure cracking slightly. "Is it? Because we subpoenaed these clients. 3 of them had no idea they were being billed for consulting services. They thought the charges were part of your father's regular accounting fees." The room went silent. David's lawyer whispered something to him urgently. The billing was handled by my father. If there were errors in how services were described, that was his mistake, not mine." "So you're blaming your dead father for your fraud?" I asked, speaking for the first time. Everyone turned to look at me. David's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw something there. Guilt? Anger? Fear? Before his expression hardened into a mask. "I didn't commit fraud," he said. "I provided services." "What services?" I pressed, ignoring Sarah's gentle hand on my arm. "Name one service you provided to the Henderson account, or the Mallory firm, or Green Valley Properties." "I don't have to detail my work to you." "You do if you want to keep the money you stole." "I didn't steal anything!" David's voice rose, his careful composure finally breaking. "Dad wanted me to have that money. He set up the system himself. He told me. He promised me." "He promised you what?" Sarah asked quietly. David realized his mistake. He'd admitted too much, revealed that he and Robert had discussed arrangements that were never documented, never above board. "Nothing," he muttered. "I misspoke." But the damage was done. The court reporter had captured every word. Linda was called next. She was crying before she even sat down. "Mrs. Grant," Sarah began gently, "did you receive monthly payments from your father's estate after his death?" "Yes," Linda whispered. "Were these payments authorized by the will filed with the court?" I thought they were. David told me they were." "So you didn't verify this yourself?" "I trusted my brother. I trusted that he was handling things properly." "Even though these payments were never disclosed to your mother?" Linda's tears came harder. "I thought Mom knew. I thought she just didn't want to talk about money. It made her sad, talking about Dad's finances, so we didn't bring it up. It was a more sympathetic defense than David's cold denial, but it was still a lie. I had the emails where Linda discussed keeping Mom in the dark about the distributions. Sarah produced them, one by one, and watched Linda's story crumble. "I'm sorry," Linda sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Mom. We were wrong. We were so wrong." But sorry wasn't enough. Not anymore. The final nail came when Carol was called to testify. She walked in with perfect confidence, settled into her chair with a smile. "Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah began, "you're Robert Whitmore's sister, correct?" "Yes, and Margaret's dear friend." "Some friend," I muttered. Sarah continued. "Did you encourage David and Linda to contest Margaret's rights to the estate?" "I encouraged them to follow their father's wishes." "Which were?" "That David should manage the finances and Linda should receive support. Robert told me this himself." "When?" "Many times over the years." "Can you provide specific dates, contexts, witnesses to these conversations?" Carol hesitated. "They were private family discussions." "How convenient." "Mrs. Whitmore, did you tell David about the second will?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah produced a recorded phone call, legal in Ohio with one-party consent, and I had been that one party when Carol had called me 3 weeks earlier to make another plea for family unity. Carol's voice came through the speaker. "If you'd just let this go, Margaret, no one ever has to know Robert changed his mind at the end. We can all remember him the way he was before he got confused and paranoid. In the recording, I had asked, 'How did you know he changed his mind?' Because David told me about the second will. He said Robert wasn't thinking clearly, that we should just ignore it." The recording ended. Carol's face had gone white. "No further questions," Sarah said. The mediation didn't end with a dramatic verdict. That would come later, in court. But it ended with something better. Truth. They had been caught in lie after lie, contradiction after contradiction. As we packed up to leave, David approached me one last time. "I hope you're happy," he said bitterly. "You've destroyed this family." I looked at my son. This man I had raised, nursed through childhood illnesses, celebrated at graduations and weddings, and felt nothing but sadness. "I didn't destroy it, David," I said quietly. "You did. The moment you decided money mattered more than integrity." I walked out of that courthouse with my head high, Sarah beside me. The winter sun was bright, almost blinding after hours in that dim conference room. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked. I thought about it. "Strong," I said finally. "I feel strong." The judge's ruling came 6 weeks later. I sat in the courtroom, Ruth on one side and Sarah on the other, as Judge Patricia Brennan read through her decision. David, Linda, and Carol sat on the opposite side with Richard Crane, their faces carefully blank. "In the matter of the estate of Robert Whitmore," Judge Brennan began, her voice clear and authoritative, "this court finds that the second will, dated 1 month prior to the decedent's death, represents his true testamentary intent and supersedes all previous wills." I felt Ruth squeeze my hand. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "this court finds clear and convincing evidence of fraud perpetrated by David Whitmore and Linda Grant, co-executors of the original estate. The evidence demonstrates that both parties were aware of the second will and took deliberate steps to conceal its existence from the probate court and from the primary beneficiary, Margaret Whitmore." David's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we respectfully—" "Sit down, Mr. Crane. I'm not finished." Judge Brennan's tone was icy. "The court also finds that David Whitmore engaged in fraudulent business practices through Whitmore Consulting, LLC, billing clients for services not rendered and diverting funds that rightfully belong to those clients. This court is referring those findings to the Ohio Attorney General's office for potential criminal prosecution." David's face went pale. Criminal prosecution. The words hung in the air like a death sentence to his career, his reputation, his freedom. "As for the distributions made since Robert Whitmore's death," Judge Brennan said, "all payments made to David Whitmore, Linda Grant, and Carol Whitmore are hereby deemed improper and must be returned in full to the estate. Additionally, both David Whitmore and Linda Grant are removed as executors, and Margaret Whitmore is appointed sole executor and primary beneficiary as specified in the valid will. Your Honor, my clients cannot possibly repay those amounts in full, Crane protested. They've used those funds for living expenses, investments. Then your clients should have thought about that before committing fraud, Judge Brennan said curtly. They have 90 days to arrange repayment, or the court will authorize seizure of assets. That includes real property, business interests, and investment accounts. She looked directly at David and Linda. You should also know that your mother would have been within her rights to pursue criminal charges against both of you for fraud, conspiracy, and theft. That she has chosen not to do so speaks to a mercy you never extended to her. Actually, I had wanted to press charges. Sarah had advised against it. Winning the civil case is enough, Margaret. Let them live with the shame instead of making martyrs of them in prison. I had reluctantly agreed, though part of me still wanted to see them face criminal consequences. Judge Brennan continued. This court also awards Margaret Whitmore attorney's fees and costs to be paid by the defendants jointly and severally. The total amount, she glanced at her papers, is $78,412. I heard Linda gasp. David remained stone-faced, but his hands were clenched into fists. One final matter, Judge Brennan said. Mrs. Whitmore has requested that the court issue a restraining order preventing the defendants from contacting her directly or through intermediaries, except through legal counsel regarding the repayment plan. Given the evidence of harassment and threats made during this proceeding, that request is granted. The defendants are to have no contact with Margaret Whitmore for a period of 2 years. Your Honor, Linda said, her voice breaking. She's our mother. You can't. I can, and I have. You should have thought about your relationship with your mother before you betrayed her trust. Judge Brennan banged her gavel. This matter is concluded. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I sat very still, letting the reality sink in. I had won. Not just won, I had achieved total victory. Everything they had taken, they would have to return. Every lie they had told was now part of public record. Every scheme they had concocted had been exposed and condemned. David stood abruptly and left without looking at me. Linda tried to approach, tears streaming down her face, but a bailiff stepped between us, enforcing the restraining order that had just been issued. Carol followed David out, her shoulders hunched in defeat. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Apparently, the case had attracted local media attention. A widow in her 70s taking on her own children for inheritance fraud made for compelling news. Mrs. Whitmore, how do you feel about the verdict? A young woman with a microphone asked. I feel vindicated, I said simply, and I hope this serves as a reminder that age doesn't mean weakness, and family doesn't justify cruelty. Do you think you'll reconcile with your children? I paused, considering. That depends entirely on them. I've learned that forgiveness can't be given until accountability is accepted. Right now, they're still trying to justify what they did. Until that changes, there's nothing to reconcile. What will you do with the money? The money was never the point, I said. The point was justice. But to answer your question, I'm going to live comfortably, support causes I believe in, and maybe take a trip to Italy. I've always wanted to see Rome. Ruth laughed beside me. You're taking me with you. Obviously, I said, smiling for the first time in months. The next morning, I woke up in my house legally and finally mine, and felt something I hadn't felt since Robert died. Peace. The rose garden outside my window needed tending. The kitchen needed cleaning. Life needed living. I had fought, and I had won. Not because I was ruthless or cruel, but because I refused to be a victim. I refused to accept that love meant accepting abuse, that family meant tolerating betrayal, that my age made me powerless. Robert had been right. I was stronger than I knew. And now, finally, I believed it too. A week later, I received a letter. Not from David or Linda, they were forbidden from contacting me, but from Jeremy and Josh, Linda's twins. 2 handwritten notes in careful 8-year-old script. Dear Grandma, Jeremy's read, Mom says we can't see you for a while because of grown-up problems. I don't understand why. I miss you. Love, Jeremy. Josh's was shorter. I hope you're okay, Grandma. I love you. I cried over those letters. My grandchildren didn't understand, couldn't understand the complexity of what had happened. They just knew that Grandma was gone. That was the price of justice, losing innocent relationships along with the guilty ones. But I couldn't have kept the grandchildren's love while letting their parents teach them that lies and theft were acceptable. Sometimes the hardest part of doing the right thing is accepting that it costs you something precious. I put the letters in a box and stored them in my closet. Maybe one day, when they were older, I could explain. Maybe one day they would understand, or maybe they wouldn't. And I would have to live with that. But I would live with it standing tall, with my dignity intact and my conscience clear. That was worth more than any inheritance. 6 months after the verdict, my life transformed completely. Ruth and I traveled to Italy, 3 glorious weeks exploring Rome, Florence, and Venice. I finally experienced the freedom I'd denied myself for so long. Back home, I found new purpose volunteering at the senior center, helping others navigate estate planning and avoid elder abuse. My story inspired people to protect themselves. Meanwhile, David's life crumbled. His accounting career was destroyed, his wife divorced him, and he moved away, disgraced and alone. Linda and Mark barely held their marriage together under crushing debt. They lost their house. Carol fled to Florida, her reputation ruined. I felt no guilt. They'd had every chance to choose differently. The greatest surprise came when Michael, David's son, visited. I told him the truth. He cried, apologized, and asked to rebuild our relationship. Maybe the next generation could learn from these mistakes. My life wasn't perfect, but I had dignity, freedom, and self-respect. That was more than enough. Robert's second will taught me that I was stronger than anyone believed, including myself. The greatest betrayal wasn't the money, but assuming I was too old and weak to fight back. If you face similar betrayal, remember, you deserve better. Age doesn't make you powerless. Family doesn't mean tolerating abuse. So I ask you, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories. Thank you for listening. May you have strength when you need it most.